In this tutorial, we're going to show you how you can import the vectors and calculate the V-carving toolpath to cut the bull's head sign that you can see here. We're also going to show you how you can make edits to the original design and recalculate the toolpaths until we like the look of the toolpath preview. So let's go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. From the Bull's Head project folder, we're going to open the bullshead.dxf file. And so this is a vector file that's been created in another drawing program. And the software automatically sets the size to the size of the largest object within the imported file. We're going to look at making the part bigger to ensure that we have space to cut around the job and space to hold the part down also. So to edit the size, we go over to the job setup form, which has automatically been opened when we open up that vector file. So starting at the top, we're working with a single-sided job. Now the size is what we want to change. So currently we have a width of 10.39 and we're going to increase that so it's 12 inches. And we have a height of 3.8 and we're also going to increase that so that it's 5 inches. You can see that it's added height to the top and it's added width to the right hand side, and that's all down to our XY position being in the lower left hand corner here, and we'll come back to this in a moment. The thickness of material we're working with is 1/2 inch, we're working in inches. Then we move on to the Z0 position. So here is where we basically tell the software where we're going to reference the tip of the tool from, whether that be on the material surface or on the machine bed. Now in this case, as we are intending to just V-carve our sign, it makes sense to reference that from the top surface of our material. So we're going to use this option here. So then we move on to our XY datum position. Now when we open a vector file like this, the software will try to automatically position it relative to the coordinates that it was saved from in the original file. And so it does that by using this offset value to move the X0, Y0 position, which we can see judging by these lines is over in this position over here. Now if I don't need to keep that original location, then we can look at unchecking that and we can see that X0, Y0 has been moved to the lower left hand corner indicated by this square, and we can see now that the rules actually come out from this point. So everything is positive up the Y-axis here, everything is positive along the X-axis here. So we have the option to scale our design with our job size. I don't need to do that, so we'll leave that unchecked. And then we can alter the resolution here if we was working with a 3D part. As we're not, we're only doing V-carving here. We're just going to ignore this section, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So now that we've imported that file and we've set up the job and everything is set from the lower left hand corner, I'd like to take this design and move it to the center of our workspace. So to do that, we need to select all of the vectors, and there are various ways of doing this, so we'll go through a few of them now. One way, and one of the easiest ways, is just by clicking outside of the area that you want to select. Click and then use your mouse to drag, and you'll see we've got a selection box. Get everything within that selection box, let go, and everything will be selected. Another way is by going to Edit and then go to Selection. We're going to select all vectors, and then the shortcut to do that is by pressing Ctrl A on the keyboard. So with everything selected, we want to align those vectors to the center of our material or our workspace. So to do that, we can come over to the Align tools. And so here we're able to align our vectors to the material both vertically and horizontally. So we're going to use this middle option here, and we can see now it's centrally aligned to our workspace. So let's close out of the alignment tools form. Now I would like to make some further edits to the design of our sign, but we'll come back to this shortly, as I'd like to show you just how quickly we can create a toolpath for this part. Now if your vectors are the correct size and they're in the correct position, then we can just use this option over here to switch over to the toolpaths tab and just come out of the design side of the software. So we'll click on that option there, that will open up the toolpaths tab on the right hand side, and this is where we can attach toolpath information to those vectors and we can simulate how our part will look on our CNC. And so at the top of our toolpaths form, we have these illustrations that are indicators into how we've set up our material. So important things like where our XY datum position is in the lower left hand corner, X0, Y0, our Z0 position on the top of our material thickness is 1/2 inch, and you can check over this before you go and create any toolpaths. But as a beginner user, it's best to get into the habit of checking over the actual material setup first. So let's use the set option to open up the material setup form. So we are working with a thickness of 1/2 inch. Our XY datum position is in the lower left. We're setting Z0 off the material surface. We don't need to worry about the model position in the material as we are not working with 3D parts. Then we need to check over the rapid Z gaps above the material. So these are values that are used for the tool to retract to before it moves to the next position in the toolpath. And so it's important to ensure here that the values are high enough that the tool will clear any clamping or hold down method that you might be using. Then we have the home and start position. So this is just a value that I enter to give the software a location to move the tool to before we start the cut. So we have a Z gap above the material of 0.8 where X is at 0, Y is also at 0. And then we could go ahead and press OK. So with our vectors selected, we're going to go into the VCarve toolpaths. That's this icon here. And if we click on that, that will open up the VCarve toolpath form. And so we need to specify our cut depths. So the start depth is going to be at 0. So it's going to be from the surface of the material going down. And the tool is going to go down as deep as it can get all the way to the point of the tool. And that will all depend on the width of the vectors and the actual angle of the tool that we're going to be using. So we need to select a tool. So we use the select option here, and that's going to open up our tool database. So this is a library of tools. And here you have a standard default set where the tool settings are appropriate for hardwood material to use on a large format CNC machine. And you have the ability to edit and create new tools, as well as the ability to create a new tool set for different materials and different machines. And you can learn more about this having a look at the tool database guide tutorial. So we're going to look at choosing a 90-degree 1/2 inch V-bit, and we can see some of the parameters and the feeds and speeds that have been set for this particular tool. So we're going to use the select option to assign that to the toolpath. You can see in the form we have lots of other options that have been greyed out, and that's because we're not using the flat depth option. So we can come down to the bottom and we can give that a name. We're just going to call this one VCarve and then go ahead and press calculate. And so we can see that the software has calculated that very quickly, and it's opened up the toolpath preview form, and it's automatically put me into a 3D view environment where I can see the toolpath represented by these blue lines, and I could look at simulating the toolpath being cut in this virtual block that we've got here. And so this toolpath has been drawn for us in the 3D view, and this literally represents the coordinates that the software is going to tell the tool to move to in order to carve the sign out. And this is very useful for me to see the actual paths here, but it's more useful for me to visualize the actual cutout simulation, and that's what this preview function is for. And so starting at the top, we have an option here to choose what material we want to visualize our block in. The moment it's currently set to Canadian maple. Here we have many different woods that we've got in there. We've got different metals, stones, we've got plastics. You can also choose to use a solid color. If you wanted to, you could add in a new texture. So you could use the add new texture option, where you just open up a bitmap of a texture in here and use the open option, and that will transform your block of material to the bitmap that you've provided. In this case, I'd like to go with a cherry option. Okay, so I'm going to cut the sign out of a piece of cherry, so I'm going to try and visualize it as best as I can with this cherry material background. So next option in the form is how we display the actual cutout when we come to simulate the toolpath. Okay, so we can fill that with the material colour, so as if we were just cutting into our material. We can choose a global fill colour, so any toolpaths that we cut into, we can assign a colour to see how that looks. We could also go with a toolpath colour if you wanted to, in which case you could replicate how you might paint up your part, and we'll come back to this shortly. Then we have the option to animate our preview, so we actually get to see an animation of the toolpath being cut into our virtual block of material, whereby we also have the option to draw the tool, so we can see the actual tool cutting away at the part as well. So before we preview our toolpath, I'm just going to change the machine area colour to the material colour. Now this section allows us to preview the toolpath, so I'm just going to take this slider and just move it somewhere in the middle. This is the speed adjustment at which we're previewing the animated simulation, and so we can now go ahead and preview this. So when I press preview, we're seeing the actual tool, so you can see the drawn tool, we can see the path that it's going to take, and what we see here is exactly what we're going to see on our CNC machine, and we can speed that up if we wanted to until it finished that simulation. And so we can see the exact shape that we're going to get here on our machine, and this is so important. If I think that this looks right here at this stage, then I can go away with confidence, save out the toolpath, and know it should look like this if I set everything correctly on my CNC. Now, if something doesn't look right at this stage, I have the option to fix it before wasting any time or material in cutting this part, and so it's vital that you always check your toolpath preview. Another nice thing about our previews, we can get a real feel for how our part will look when we finish it. For example, if I'm going to gild this sign, I could go to the global fill colour, assign a colour to that, and see how that will look within the preview itself. So let's do that. We'll go to global fill colour, choose the colour, we'll go to that gold colour, and we can see how our part would look if we was to paint everything that was cut away in this gold colour. So as well as this preview being useful for me, I can use this as a marketing aid, where I can look at saving out the preview as an image, and I can send that image to my customer as a proof, and I can even use this for the images in a portfolio or put them on my website, and ultimately show people the capabilities that we have with a CNC. And so if we go to save preview image, we can just give that image a name, so we'll call that bull's head preview. Okay, so you can save it out as a BMP, JPEG, PNG, and then we could just go ahead and save that. So even though we are explaining the steps to create this sign in a lot of detail, you can see how quickly it is to open the vector file, alter the job setup, select all of the vectors and center them in our job, then take those vectors, switch over to the toolpaths tab, double check over the material setup, create the toolpath, calculate it and preview it here. We could have, in theory, got to this stage within a minute of starting. So now I want to show you how you'd save this data into a format that your CNC machine would understand. So let's close out of the preview toolpaths form, and we're going to go into this option here to save out the toolpath. So in the form, we can see the toolpaths to be saved is the VCarve toolpath, and it's pulled that up from the list. If nothing was shown here, you may want to uncheck this option to output all visible toolpaths to one file. And so we can see the toolpaths to be saved here. The next thing we need to do is select an appropriate post-processor. And so the post-processor will format the data for that particular machine or the control software that it runs on. And so you need to choose one that is suitable for your machine. And if you're not sure, then you could talk to your machine manufacturer or Vectric support. And there are so many that most of the major machines are taken care of here. In this case, we're going to use a generic G-code post, G-code int, and we're just going to go ahead and save that out. So we go to Save Toolpath, we'll give that a name, and then we'll use the Save option, and then we'll just take that file over to the CNC, set up the material, and then cut the part out. And so there we've seen the whole process here from starting with a set of vectors to seeing something that we can machine. So now I'd like to look at how we can make edits to the design. So let's close out of the toolpath form here. We're going to switch over to the design side and we're going to go straight into the 2D view. So I'm actually wanting to make edits to the actual border shape. So we're going to click into the white space and I'm going to take this inner border vector and I'm actually going to delete it using the delete key on the keyboard. Then we're going to take the outer border vector. We can see it's a rectangle, so I could use the E command on the keyboard and that will open up the draw rectangle form for me. Otherwise, I could just use this option here to go into the draw rectangle form. So we can see in this form it's pulled up the width and the height dimensions of the rectangle. Now I'm just going to look at rounding this up. So we're going to change the width of this so that it's 11 and we're going to change the height to be 4 inches. We're going to make sure that we're scaling that about the center of our part, so that's our anchor point, and then we can apply that and you'll see it's made those changes there. We have another option in this form to alter the corner type. So at the moment we've got square corners. We could look at giving that a radius external corner. So here we just enter in a radius. So we'll just go with a radius of 1/2 inch and then we could apply that to see how that looks. So you can see we've got more of a curved corner like we've got here. Or we could look at using radius internal. Okay, so this is kind of a nice decorative classic sign corner that we've got there. So let's do that, the same radius, apply that, and I like the look of those corners that we've got within this sign. Okay, so once you're happy, we can simply close out of the form. And so with that vector selected, I'd like to create another vector that comes inwards by a specified amount. So we're going to just create another border and we could look at using the offset tool here. So with that vector selected, let's go over into the offset tool. So I want to offset this inwards, so it's going to create another vector inside of the current vector by a distance that we specify here, in which case we're going to go with the distance of 0.2. So put 0.2 in there, we're going to check the option to create the sharp offset corners, and then we'll go ahead and press offset, and you'll see that it's created this new vector offset inwards by 0.2 of an inch. And then we can close out of that form. And so there's lots of tools that we can use to create shapes and edit shapes, where we have a set of very powerful design tools to create vectors from scratch or edit existing artwork. Okay, so now that we have our border, we can switch back over to the Toolpaths tab and we can look at recalculating our toolpath but using our newly created border. So to do that, let's just double click on that toolpath and it will select all the vectors that it used previously to create the original toolpath. We can see that this offset vector is not selected, so this is a new vector that we've created. So we need to select that as part of our selection. To do that, we hold down Shift and then we just simply click on it to select it. We go the exact same settings and then we can go ahead and calculate that. Okay, so it's opened up the preview toolpaths form. We can currently see the preview of our last toolpath that we simulated. So in this case, we want to reset the preview. We'll put that so that we're looking down the Z-axis, and then we can simply go ahead and preview the selected toolpath. So I like the effect of the border that we've got here. It looks much better than our first design. However, looking at the text, it kind of looks like it's pushed over to the right hand side of our design. And we know that mathematically our vectors are centered to the center of our job. And I guess it's all to do with this decorative B area here and the flourish that we've got. And so sometimes, even though it's mathematically correct, visually we may need to just look at shifting the text over to the left hand side just so it looks more in the center of our part. So to do that, let's just close out of the preview toolpaths form. We're going to switch back over to the design commands, and we're going to go into the 2D preview. And so it's only the bull's head text that we actually want to move. So I need to deselect the border vectors. So to do that, I'm going to hold down Shift, and then I'm going to click on the outer border, still holding down Shift. I'm going to click on the inner border, so it's only the text that remains highlighted. And so with this, we can select it again to put it into transform mode, and we can look at moving this. So we can move this manually using the arrow keys if we wanted to, or we could look at moving this precisely. And so we'll do that in this example. So we'll come over and we're going to use this option here to move selected objects. And so here we have the option to move that to an absolute position in our job based on our anchor point, or we can move it to a relative position in our job. Okay, so that's moving it relative from where it is now. We're going to do that in this case. So we want to move it left in the x-axis, so we're actually going in negative numbers. So for x, we're going to put in a negative, and we're just going to move that by a small 1/4 of an inch there, and then we could go ahead and press apply, and you'll see that that's moved that over by a 1/4 of an inch, and that actually looks okay. It looks more centered to the border itself. And so when you're happy with that, you can close out. Now, not only can we move our text, but we can also look at sizing this if we wanted to. So selecting it again to put it in transform mode, we can take one of these handles, and then holding down Shift, we can look at scaling that up, or we could look at bringing that down. In this case, we're just going to make that text a little bit larger, like so, and then just using the arrow keys, we might just nudge that over to the right slightly, maybe back over to the left. And really, this is very much a subjective opinion on where you like the look of something within your design. So now let's go and recalculate the toolpath. So we'll switch back over to the toolpaths tab. Okay, so one other way of going into your toolpath, with that highlighted, we could use this option here to edit the toolpath. Okay, so it's selected all of the vectors there in that toolpath, and we can just go ahead and calculate that. We can reset that preview, and then we could go ahead and preview that toolpath to see what our new edited design looks like on the simulation. And if we just put that in the ISO view, and you can see that that looks a lot better than what we had before. Okay, so I'm happy with this design that we've got here. And so it's very important that your part looks correct at this stage. As you've seen, we've made several iterations to this part and previewing those changes until we like the look of the preview. And the toolpath preview shows you an accurate representation of what we'd see on our CNC machine if you was to go ahead and run these toolpaths. So if something doesn't look as you wanted it here at this stage, then you can, as you've seen in this example, go back and make edits to the vectors or the toolpaths, recalculate them until you are satisfied with the results that you can see here in our preview. And that's what makes the toolpath preview such a powerful tool. And so at this stage we'd simply close out, we'd go ahead and save out those toolpaths, and then you'd run those toolpaths onto your CNC machine. And it's always good practice to actually save out the file. So if you go to File, Save As, and in your Bull's Head project folder, we're going to call this one Bull's Head Getting Started. Press save and you can access that from that folder.